Hi, everyone, and welcome to State of State. This podcast is presented by Bet Online, your number one source for all your betting needs. Get the latest odds, lines, and matchup reports for baseball, boxing, golf, and more. Bet Online continues to be the fastest and easiest way to place your wagers, including live betting, plus your favorite casino and card games available to play right from your phone. Get into the action today. Head to betonline.ag or use your mobile device to join, and be sure to use our promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. State of State is presented by BetOnline, where the game starts. Also, State of State is a proud supporter of Blue White Outfitters. Blue White Outfitters was created as a retail shop meant to highlight the confidence, competitiveness, and fearlessness of the elite athletes found throughout the history of Penn State University. All sales from Blue White Outfitters directly benefit Penn State student athletes. Visit www.bluewhiteoutfitters.com today. Also, Penn State fans, this year the Nittany Lions are celebrating 20 years of tackling rare diseases at their annual Lift for Life going down tomorrow. That's Thursday, June 22nd. This event will include a skills competition, a fitness challenge, and an opportunity for fans and the community to be involved. In-person attendance is free and open to the public. Join Penn State's football team at the Lash Football Building tomorrow, or make a $20 donation today to celebrate this monumental milestone. Visit pledgeit.org/PSUFBLIFT23. That's pledgeit.org/PSUFBLIFT23. Today, we're talking about all things Penn State quarterbacks, and joining us is not a quarterback, but a former Penn State tight end. He is the host of Next Up with Adam Breneman. He is Adam Breneman. Adam, it's great to talk to you again. You are maybe the busiest man in college football podcasting. Literally, you're getting to travel all over the country, it seems, to get to talk to a lot of different players. How have things been going? Because it does seem like you have your hands in a lot of different things, a lot of different networks, especially.
I appreciate you guys having me on. First of all, love what you guys are doing. Love the rebrand of the show, everything. Love that you're partnering up with Justin, former. I remember watching him play back in the day, man. I remember those days, bro. Those were. I'll make you feel old when I say how young I was when you were playing. But I love what you guys are doing. But I appreciate it, man. It's been busy. It's been fun. Just got a lot of stuff going on right now, getting ready, first of all, for football season, and all that's going to come with that. Hopefully, doing some more and more television stuff when the season comes. And then the podcast right now has been a lot of fun, kind of doing like a head coaches tour right now. So getting on a bunch of different coaches, going to do Coach Franklin. Actually, we're recording this on Tuesday, so Thursday I'll be in Penn State, in State College, having Coach Franklin on. So it's been fun, keeping me busy, but it's also cool. I think the podcast part is getting the coaches on the pod. It's how hard it is to get those guys to sit down for an hour and talk about their life. I mean, it's not an easy thing to book. So it's been fun to kind of get that and get them to show a different side of themselves a little bit.
I'm really interested to see what you get out of Franklin, because I, for one, listened to both your interviews with former Penn State quarterback Christian Hackenberg and current Penn State quarterback Drew Allar. And it was kind of the reason why I was like, we got to get Adam on here to talk about some of this stuff, because I'm curious about your takeaways. And I remember texting you about this after the Hackenberg interview came out. There were things as a fan and as a broadcaster that nobody would have ever known before that interview you did with Hack. And I know you played with him. You're very close with him, obviously, to this day. He's a very private guy. It seems like he's gone through a lot of things professionally, but is at a good place in his life now.
Yeah.
What was your takeaway, first of all, from the Hackenberg interview, looking back on it?
I appreciate you saying that. And I think, number one, you're right. Christian is a private guy. And it's funny, we talk about it on the podcast. Christian, when we were at Penn State, would always talk about how he didn't like the media. He didn't like the attention. He didn't like how everyone knew who he was. And I always thought it was bullshit, right? I was like, dude, you love what do you mean? Like, I know you like the attention, but as I got to know Christian more and more, like, he really doesn't like it. Like, that's not him. he wants nothing to do with it. I mean, even when he was done playing, I mean, he just kind of, no one really heard from him for a while. And I would always say to him, why don't you go back to Penn State? Like, why don't you go on the sideline for games? And like, he just kind of wanted to be away from everything, especially, you know, when the ups and downs of his career, and a lot happened at Penn State when he was there. But I think for Christian, he felt like it was time that he wanted to talk about what went down. And no better podcast to go on than your best friend's podcast. And I think he knew I wouldn't try to screw him at the end of the day. But I thought he presented himself really, really well. And clearly you can hear on that podcast, like how articulate he is, how much he's grown as a person, like as a man since he was at Penn State, how much Penn State means to him, and how important it was for him to talk about that and to give the fans an inside look on that perspective that he had after he finished up at Penn State. And what I could tell too from knowing him for a while is he thought a lot about what he wanted to say on that podcast. And I thought that was a really cool part for fans, especially that Penn State fans got to see a side of him and got to hear stories and have him talk about that time in Penn State history, which was, you know, one of the hardest times in the history of college football, at a really cool and like deep level. And I think clearly a lot of fans enjoyed it. I was telling Christian the other day, we were talking about something else this fall, and I said, out of all the podcasts I've done now, the one that people talk to me about the most is the Christian Hackenberg episode. And it's not even close, like by a mile. I love the Christian Hackenberg interview. And I think people love stories like that too, right? Any kind of like, you know, comeback redemption story. People love hearing that kind of stuff.
You just never know what somebody's really going through. And I think especially Penn State fans are tough on quarterbacks. Look at what Sean Clifford went through. And listen, I'll be the first person to raise my hand and say I was critical of Sean Clifford when he was playing at Penn State, but his legacy is undeniable. And the fact that it's a 5th-round pick to the Green Bay Packers and sounds like he's fitting in well in camp, there's a lot of Penn State fans who are shocked. There's a lot of Penn State fans who are not surprised. I know James Franklin, not surprised one iota. So I'm very happy to see that transition. Justin, for you, looking at the recent pantheon of Penn State quarterbacks, and you got to be around Michael Robinson, Anthony Morelli, Daryl Clark. What do you think the scrutiny from the fan base, where does that come from?
I mean, it's interesting because I think when you label out those 3 quarterbacks, I think they brought different things to the table, right? You got Michael Robinson, who was an elite leader. I mean, probably one of the best leaders I've been around in football. Had Morelli, he was #1 quarterback coming out of high school. Big arm, you know, great talent. Then at the time, Daryl Clark was scout team quarterback that we saw every day. And so you had the ultimate leader, you had the big arm quarterback, pocket passer, and then you just had Daryl Clark, who looked like a defensive end. It was like way before his time, by the way, probably one of the most talented quarterbacks that I've like seen. If you see him today, you know, 6'3", 230, whatever. But he was always slinging around in scout team. And just to see the plethora of things that they brought to the table, I think there's a level of consistency and toughness that you see from quarterbacks, right? From Penn State, especially we got Michael Robinson, who's played multiple positions. And then even coming back and working at Penn State and seeing someone like a Trace McSorley. So that's who I saw when I first transitioned off of the field. And it's interesting that you say your AB's interviewing James on Friday. So on Thursday, but he used to have a question on exit interviews or, you know, year-end interviews about like who's the most valuable player or person like in the building or the staff or whatever the case may be. Some people say, you know, staff members, who's not, just to see what value you're bringing to the table, being transparent. And it's like the most valuable person is Trace McSorley. Like when you see like the level of leadership that he brought to the organization, to the team, and like the consistency, the toughness, showing up in crunch time, it reminded me of like the Michael Robinson days where you're playing on a team where it's like, and we don't believe we can lose, right? Like playing Northwestern 415, it's like, we're going to get this some way. And it's just being around those type of guys and that level of toughness. I think you see that in Hackenberg, right? When he comes on the podcast and shares his experience at Penn State, and you see like, oh, there's depth to this guy. It's not like a flighty kid that's this, that, or the third. It's like, no, there's things here. And then you see it like with Drew Allar, like you see the consistency amongst like the character at the end of the day. But I think there's a level of character and toughness. And let's not forget Sean Clifford. Like the one thing I always like just commended him on, obviously he had a roller coaster season at some times, but the grit to play quarterback at a high level and make plays they did and the level of confidence that Sean Clifford has, that's a comfort as a competitor that you want. And I think that's the consistency that you see amongst Penn State quarterbacks just through the history to become like is a level of toughness. But taking our hits on, the producing ones that go to the NFL and stuff like that, but we can see what happens here.
Well, and even looking back historically, Todd Blackledge, Kerry Collins, high draft picks. So it's like you have that in the history of Penn State quarterbacks. But Adam, to me, as a fan, as a former student, as a broadcaster, the way I've always perceived it is that Penn State fans are very wary of the guy who's highly touted, the number one quarterback, big arm, big time recruit. Look at Anthony Morelli, who we just mentioned, Christian Hackenberg, and now Drew Allar. I think even Rob Bolden was a guy who had some huge expectations and it just didn't work out that way. Do you think it's the fan base that's kind of like, oh, we don't want the bright, shiny toy. We want the underdog, a la Trace McSorley, a la Michael Robinson, who just kind of makes it happen, makes it all work?
Yeah, it's funny. The Penn State fan base, as much as I love them, they've been tough in that instance for a lot of reasons because of how much tradition and how Penn State's done it a certain way for a long time. And there's always the talk of, we only bring in like Penn State guys, Pennsylvania guy, and it's, we'd rather have the tough kid than the talented kid. I think the magic is finding both, right? the tough and the talented kid. I think without a doubt, Penn State's a tough fan base to play quarterback for. The reality is every elite program in college football is a tough fan base to play quarterback for. It's tough to be a quarterback at Alabama. It's tough to be one at Florida. It's tough to be one everywhere. So yeah, I think it's has a lot to do with just the tradition and the success at Penn State and how we've done it a long way, the right way for a long time, and not necessarily needed the biggest recruits or all the 5 stars that come in and do it. But I think the thing that Drew's done, and it's what Christian did too when he got to campus, and it's funny, the similarities in just like personality and then also like their build and how they look between Christian and Drew is there's a lot of them. There's a lot of similarities. Like Drew reminds me a little bit of Christian when he was a freshman. But the ability to come in and be a 5-star, but also come in and command the respect of the locker room right away, and for people to see the way you work. I mean, there's no way to get respect until you actually perform on the field and do it at a high level, and people see you put in the work every single day. I remember when I got to Penn State, Bill O'Brien, the first thing he said to me, like literally the first thing he said when I got there was, no one gives a shit that you're a 5-star anymore. Like no one actually cares. Does not matter. I mean, Justin, you know how that is, man. Like no one cares anymore. And I think the sooner you realize that, which it seems like Drew has and Drew does, the easier it is to win over the locker room, and the easier it is to be a leader on the team and someone that people actually look up to because of how you conduct yourself and not just because you were a 5-star.
Justin, in your conversations with staff members within the team and even players, how's Drew Allar being received at this point in time?
I think he's been received well. I mean, especially from a leader standpoint. I was in the weight room a couple of weeks ago. You get to see how they work, right? Or how he works specifically, whether it's just like taking his reps, then throwing the ball to the center, taking snaps, and just having like a methodical and pro-like approach to everything he does at such a young age, and not being a starting quarterback. But if you walked into the weight room and everyone's there, if no name, no face or anything like that, you would say, oh, that's the starting quarterback right there. Just by the way he was carrying himself, by the way his demeanor, and just, I mean, I'm big on reading guys and just understanding, filling in the pixels on evals, right? You understand the internal makeup of a guy, you can kind of see what they're made of. And I was impressed by just how he conducted himself. Like every time I've seen him, to be completely honest. And I mean, I think the sky's the limit. It was just interesting to see what comes up.
Adam, you were saying that speaking with Drew, you saw some comparisons to Hackenberg, but what were your overall takeaways of the young man sitting in front of you? Because let's not forget, this is the NIL era that a lot of people have been talking about. It's like, oh, it's great that he's here, but I hope he stays. I hope he's here for a while. And me watching the interview, this is a kid that looks like he's really happy and really comfortable at Penn State.
Yeah, I was super impressed. I've gotten to know Drew a little bit. I didn't know him super well before the interview, but I got just getting on the podcast, right?
He
Like
was, yeah.
you could tell he was nervous. Like and that's just being young, right? And it's just like, it's a kid that everyone's talking about right now in college football, and he's nervous to go on a podcast. It kind of reminds you like how young he is, right? Like he hasn't experienced life yet. So that I thought that was really cool. But just, I mean, number one, awesome kid, like great to be around. Easy to work with. I mean, even when it comes to like scheduling podcasts, there's like easy to work with and not easy to work with. I mean, Drew wasn't like, he didn't make me call his agent. He didn't ask for the questions ahead of time. He was super easy and super down to earth. And then I thought the conversation was really good, and he's super articulate. He cares. You can tell he thinks things through. He's super thoughtful. There were some moments, you tell everything he did, he directed back to his teammates. I even asked him, I said, if you saw it, Tom, you probably remember, I said, who's going to be on the Heisman stage with you at the end of the year? And he said like Nick Singleton, Katron Allen. I'm like, Drew.
Great answers.
Give me a real answer. And then even one of my favorite parts is I asked him, we were talking about NIL. And of course, that's like the hot topic. I'm of course going to dig on the NIL topic, And I said, what was your first big purchase when you made some NIL money? And he's like, I really splurged. I had a huge purchase. And he's like, it was like $1,200 on golf clubs. I was like, that was your big splurge NIL purchase, $1,200 golf clubs. But it's just super down to earth, awesome kid. And it's funny, man. Like I said it in the beginning of the pod. The day before we shot that, I was at the Penn State Coaches versus Cancer golf outing, and obviously around a ton of Penn State fans, a ton of donors, and just around the community. I don't know if I can remember in my lifetime a time that there was more excitement around the program than there is right now. And also more expectations for a quarterback than there are right now. I mean, there is a lot of excitement and a lot of expectation with everyone I talked to around Penn State. And I can't remember when it was like that the last time. Like I can't even like put a finger on it. And it's really exciting, but it's also, you have a quarterback who hasn't started a game yet that's walking into that with really, really big expectations. It's going to be fun to see how it plays out.
Are you a fan of rivalries? Are you a fan of smack talk? Do you like to stand out from the crowd at tailgates? If so, check out Smack Apparel and see what their team has geared up for football season. Their Let There Be White tee is the perfect gear for all those famous whiteout games at Beaver Stadium. Or get straight to the point with the worst tee for all the Ohio State haters out there. Smack Apparel has the must-have tees for all your teams, including pro and college football, plus basketball, baseball. Every fan is covered. Head over to smackapparel.com and use the promo code STATE10, that's STATE10 at checkout for 10% off. Again, that's smackapparel.com, promo code STATE10 at checkout. Why we're boring when you can wear Smack. Are you looking for undeniably good hair and beard care? Then Maestro's Classic is perfect for you. Maestro's has beard washes, beard oils, beard butters, plus hair gels and pomades. It's one brand for every man. Visit maestrosclassic.com. That's MAESTROS classic.com and use our promo code STATE20. That's STATE20 at checkout for 20% off your order. Maestro's Classic, crafting a better you.
Well, and also, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that there's a lot of people still talking about Bo Perbula at Penn State. And there's a recruit coming in by the name of Ethan Grunkmeyer, or at least he's committed, and we'll see if he actually winds up on the team. I remember, Adam, when you were in school, at one point, quarterback room for the most part was Hackenberg, McSorley, Tommy Stevens.
Yeah.
Ridiculous amount of potential and ability in that room. Tommy Stevens is still playing in the Canadian Football League. Trace is still in the NFL, and we know what Hackenberg did. You got to witness that type of competition. How has that evolved, I guess, under James Franklin? Because you were there in the very early days, and now roughly 10 years later.
Yeah, I mean, just the talent in that room is really cool. I saw Coach Yursich when I was up there, and I was just saying to him, I was like, man, you got a lot of talent in that quarterback room, which is a good thing, but it's also, when the era of the transfer portal can also be a bad thing. You got to make everyone happy. It's funny because you think to like how Penn State used Tommy Stevens, right? And they made that the lion position and like made him kind of like this like H-back.
So the Wildcat.
Yeah, the Wildcat quarterback. I think my thought originally was, obviously we can talk about who I think they're going to start, but Drew's a starter, in that you put Bo in kind of that like wildcat, the lion position. And the more I thought about it, even talking to some people, like Bo's better than that, right? Like he's a real quarterback, can play Power 5 Division I quarterback and be a starter. Almost putting him in that box of like, you're the lion, you're the wildcat quarterback is almost disrespectful to Bo. I mean, he's like he can be a real quarterback, and I think everyone in that program feels that way. From what I've heard, Bo's been super impressive, and that's actually a real competition. What I will say is, I think in today's college football, and no sources on this, this is just my opinion. Sure. Outside the box, it is really hard to bring in a 5-star quarterback and not start him when he has the first opportunity to start. I mean, that Justin, you worked in the business, you know how that is. It is really, really hard when you bring in the number 1 quarterback in the country, when he has a chance to start, to not justify a reason to start him. So I would be absolutely shocked, obviously, if Drew Allar isn't the starting quarterback week 1. But that doesn't mean that Bo hasn't impressed a lot of people. I think he's got a lot of respect in that building.
Justin, you were a 5-star. How was that treatment? What was that like getting the red carpet rolled out?
Oh man, it's about finding your leverage and maximizing. I used it for my living quarters, right? I skipped the whole dorm experience, went straight to Nittany apartments, that type of stuff. I always tell a funny story. I mean, kind of negotiated my number. I got promised number 1 by a scrap, and I got there, and he left me to Kirkdale, and I had to fight to get number 7, right? He was like, hey, we have a senior on the team right now. He's number 1, Anwar Phillips. You can go over there and ask him for the number. And I'm like looking over, it's like Tom Bahali, him, Puzz, like Mike Robb. And I'm like, give me number 7. I'll take number 7.
I'm good.
But those type of things that we got back in the day. That was it though.
Justin, especially, all kidding aside, I mentioned the quarterbacks that you got to be around. How were quarterbacks handled under Joe Paterno? Very different, I imagine, than the James Franklin era.
Yeah, they were different, right? Well, I said it was like we had a dynamic range of quarterbacks, from Michael Robinson, Morelli, and then Daryl Clark. So you're talking like some versatile athletes from Morelli and Mike. All of them were great athletes, but Mike Robb and Daryl Clark were pretty tremendous athletes. So Mike being so versatile and knowing the whole offense, playing running back, playing receiver, he had it was like having an offensive coordinator on the field with you. So like our approach there, he was like a coach on the field. So there wasn't really much to be said with Mike. It was like, here, roll the ball out. Now, when we came to the next year, kind of had a high flying, we kind of changed up the offense a little bit with Morelli, big arm, and had Deion Butler, Derek Williams, Jordan, everybody was running. So kind of changed the offense again. And then all those guys kind of matured to Daryl Clark. And I would say, I don't think the quarterbacks were left to their own vices in the sense of that athleticism. Especially when it came to Daryl Clark, 2-time Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year, which people don't, remember, but it was a high flying running gun offense, especially when I was a freshman playing receiver. It was like a new age of football. I remember my visit was, the score was 9-3. It was a tough one it was a tough one, right? So we came around and started averaging 30 points a game. But honestly, like, the quarterbacks weren't treated any differently because they were kind of the leaders. Joe Paterno, especially with Michael Robinson at the head. I was there for 3 years, so I only had a limited size.
You got your degree and you got out. You did what you had to do.
And I wasn't always the quarterback's best friends either. So when you're asking my opinion about, me and the quarterbacks had a lot of chirping back and forth. So I don't really know what Joe was saying to them.
Well, Adam, especially now looking at what Drew Allar or Bo Pribula, God knows we're not going to get the announcement on the starter until maybe days before the West Virginia game. But as a former tight end, you're looking at the pass catchers, the running backs, the offensive line. What's your assessment of what Drew Allar and or Bo Pribula has to work with on offense?
Yeah, I think the biggest question mark on that team right now is probably the receiver room, right? That's probably, which isn't a great combination for your first time starting quarterback. At the end of the day, I know this is an easy answer for me. The tight end room is kind of the comfortability that I think Drew will have, knowing that you have Theo Johnson, who's I think got a chance to be one of the best in the Big Ten. Tyler Warren, a kid that I've talked about a lot, that can really do it all. They can put him all over the field. I think that room will be a really big, just huge for him to have some comfortability of being able to go in the flat. The other thing that Drew brings to the table that I think I heard Coach talk about it a little bit, Coach Franklin. Drew obviously has a big arm, but what Drew brings is the accuracy paired with the big arm, right? Like having a big arm doesn't matter if you're not accurate. And in college football, even from we used to talk about this all the time when I was coaching, when we were game planning, college football defenses always give you the field flat. Okay, so to the field, the ball is always on the hash, almost always on the hash in college football. To the field, the flat is where they always give you the open. We call it free access. And most quarterbacks, the reason they give you that is because most college quarterbacks can't throw to the field flat. They don't have a strong enough arm, and they're not accurate enough to throw that ball. They only the top ones really can. That's what Drew brings to the table. That's throws that Drew can make. Drew can throw across the field and throw a 10-yard out. He can throw the flat route to the tight end. So I think, number one, that's where the tight ends come into play, those kind of routes that Drew has the ability to throw across the field and hit his big targets. I think what Drew brings to the table from an arm strength and accuracy standpoint and the ability to throw the ball all over the field, nothing's off the table. He can make any throw. And he's also shown the ability to throw with some touch on those crossing routes, those intermediate routes. I think he's got the ability to make receivers into really good players just with his arm talent.
Adam, you've kind of we've hit on a couple of the guests that you've already had on the show, and we talked about, a little tease and that you're going to get James Franklin this upcoming weekend. So hopefully that's going to be coming out soon. Who else is there on your dream list of podcast guests, whether they went to Penn State or not?
Yeah,
can I add something to? Can it be coaches specifically?
Yeah. Let me think here. That's a good question. So I've been trying to get Jimbo Fisher, but I'm not sure that's going to happen just because I just, there's a lot of wherever there's controversy normally makes a good podcast guest, right?
We're going to button this up. Yeah.
Yeah. So Jimbo would be a great one. We got a few coming up that are coming out, but it's funny, man. Like when you can, and Justin, you're in this whole space of the branding, the NIL, the content stuff. You can tell what coaches are innovative by how they respond to coming on a podcast, right? Like the first one that said yes was Shane Beamer, the South Carolina head coach, who's like ultra into content, into social media. The next one was like Jed Fish at Arizona, who's super into that kind of stuff. And then the ones that you never hear back from are like, the old school coaches that want nothing to do with it. I would say Jimbo's up there. Definitely. I mean, I've been trying to get Deion Sanders, but that's always a tough one. At least he's into the content thing. I think at Penn State, like I'd love to have Pat Kraft on and just hear his take on the state of Penn State athletics, where they're at. I've gotten to meet Coach Rhodes, the Penn State basketball coach, and I'm trying to plan on having him on at some point to hear about all that. And then soon we'll have Nick Singleton on just to hear about his kind of rise to fame and to stardom at Penn State. But there's a lot of them, man. There's some, any Power 5 head coach usually I'll take on the podcast. I mean, but there's always the top tier, like the Jimbo Fishers and Nick Sabans. You love that one.
Get down the lane,
Sure.
train. Lane the train.
Oh, see, that's another one, man. That's another Lane Train. I mean, he would give you some gems. I think he'd have some good sound bites, huh?
Man, I would have loved to have had a conversation with the late great Mike Leach. I think that would have been amazing on so many levels. There, that would have been fantastic. Justin, go ahead?
I was going to say, I'm actually going to see tomorrow. We're doing Brent Pry at Virginia Tech, former
Oh,
Penn State
wonderful
defensive coordinator. So we're going right from him to Coach Franklin, which will be a funny one. But Coach Pry is another one that I think will have some great stuff and be able to talk some Penn State football with him too.
Yeah, Penn State guys in that building.
Yeah, let's see if you got any stories about Franklin and all that fun stuff. But Justin, we got to get Terry Smith on here at some point. We have to.
Absolutely, man.
You got a hookup? You think we can do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can probably pull that off.
I just want to know how Terry Smith consistently just has an elite defensive backer. I mean, he's just always got him, man. He's an elite recruiter, but more importantly, he's an awesome developer and a great person and coach. But I mean, he's always got Kalen King. I mean, there's always one coming out of there, man.
The lockdown you general. No, absolutely. I think it comes down to like he just even from my career, him teaching me or coaching me growing up. I think with the key to him being a great defensive back coach, obviously he can recruit, bring in the talent so he can kind of pick the attributes he wants. But installation of confidence that he instills in his guys on a daily basis, I think is unique. I mean, that's a ultimate confidence position, right? And when you talk to the guys, how they play, they're not afraid to make mistakes, I think is like a key that I pick up on them. And they have when I say DBs, all of them have like a high effort level. Like right before you make a play at DB, you have to in your mind say, "F it, I'm going for it." They all kind of walk with that swag of like, "Yo, we're supposed to be here," and that's kind of how. I mean, when he was my coach, that was something that I embodied from him, and so like that, installation of confidence is something that's very unique and special about him. I think coaching DBs at Penn State.
And the consistency of him being there for a long time too, right? You get to develop under one coach, and when you have one coach, I know like you get confidence from having that coach because he's seen you do it before, so that coach believes in you. I talked to Sean about that, Sean Clifford, last year, and that's part of that not many people talk about with Sean Clifford. Like he had a different offensive coordinator every single year of college until he had year 2 with Mike Yursich, and now same thing with Drew Allar, the opportunity to just have the continuity of the system is huge. I think one of the biggest wins of Penn State's offseason was keeping Manny Diaz. I mean, to have another year with the same coordinator, I mean, that's massive. That's huge just to have the continuity. But just to echo what you're saying, Terry's a beast, man. He's Coach Smith has been fun to watch.
Yeah, we got to get him on at some point. We got to. Adam, thank you so much for coming on. Best of luck with everything you got coming up. For everybody that wants to check it out, it's Next Up with Adam Breneman. It's wherever you get your podcast. The Hackenberg interview is great. The Allar interview is great. And I'm sure what he does with James Franklin will be also phenomenal. So, Adam, thank you very much, and best of luck you have with everything going on, man.
Thanks guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you all so much for joining us. This episode and our entire library of shows is available now on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, TuneIn, and wherever else you get your podcasts. And of course, let us know what you think of the show on Twitter @TheKing1 and @TomHannafin. State of State is presented by Bet Online.